so much for coming at this very, very early hour of the day. And so we will now get it started. This session is about how to put the nature on the balance sheet. And then this is such an important topic, and particularly for this COP. This COP is called as the COP of truth. What do we mean by COP of truth? It's a truth to the science, that the science will tell us that we have exceeded 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. We are so close to Amazon, so that we listen to that the science. It is really important for us to do something. And so far at COP, the climate change has much of attention, but now we need to put much more important attention to the nature part. And indeed, the nature and the climate are so much related. And at this presidency, the leadership, now we put even that nature as a really core center part of the discussion. So we need to make best use of this the COP30 to really get an attention of the world to this nature, the bioeconomy, and how we can make progress. But I think we all know that so far, nature is considered to be much more than a cost, and then how we can really change it to the more investable an asset. So, but it really needs a huge challenge, and this entire initiative, Nature on the Balance Sheet, is how we can really transform our economic and valuation system so that we can account for the fullest value of nature, natural capital. So that is the initiative we have initiated together with the Capitalist Coalition, that Mark Goff is here, that the CEO of Capitalist Coalition, then the Land Banking Group, that the Systemic, and me, that the Center for Global Commons at the Tokyo University. Those institutions come together 2 years ago and launched this initiative, the Nature on the Balance Sheet. Balance sheet meaning that how we can really recognize the natural capital as an investable asset, that the financial asset, the new asset class. So that has an initiative, and this today we want to introduce to you this initiative and how we can really get more this roadmap more palatable to everybody. But today I have a very quite good luck, and because we have a wonderful lineup of the speakers, that the Minister of Nature, I was told that he was the Minister of Environment, but now we can call you the Minister of Nature under your new portfolio. He will tell us a little bit about his ambition being a minister, how you can really challenge the incumbent system. So I'm very lucky to have him as an opening speaker. Then we have another Mark Goff, that the CEO of the Capitalist Coalition, who is one of the 4 initiators of this Nature on the Balance Sheet initiative. He will tell us more about what we are trying to do. And also very lucky to have Reike, that the strategist of the Rabobank, because if we do this Nature on the Balance Sheet right, that who will be really the beneficiary? Like farmers along the value chain, then they will be receiving much more the reward by doing the right thing. So good to have the Rabobank here along the panelists. Then last but not the least at all, we are so lucky to have Majum, that I came to know him more than the decade, that he is a kind of hero to greening Chinese, that the financial system used to work for the Central Bank, People's Bank of China, and create a huge initiative to the greening that the Chinese financial system. And now he's a champion of this the capacity building of the financial transaction. He will tell us more about from his work and his experience how we can strengthen this Nature on the Balance Sheet initiative. So that is that is hope that we can get it started. First, I would like to invite the minister that particularly that under his new role, what is his ambition that to really change the role of the nature in this economic system. So, Minister, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. So this is not quite a new portfolio for me. I was the Environment and Climate Change Minister for the last 4 years. I'm now Minister of Identity, Canadian Culture, Minister of Official Languages, but also Minister of Nature. My new boss, some of you may know him, Prime Minister Carney, someone who's not unknown to these venue, cares deeply about this particular subject, but also wanted us to look at Canadian identity, which is right now, I mean, our sovereignty, our identity, our cultural sovereignty challenged by what is happening certainly south of our border. Wanted me to look at Canadian identity, not just in terms of language and culture, but also to include nature into it. I said I wasn't quite new to this. I hosted COP15 in Montreal alongside China in 2022, which led to the KMGBF. So I'm not quite sure. This is my 23rd or 24th COP. I was at COP1 in Berlin in 1995. So I'm either very optimistic or I'm some kind of masochist. One or the other, perhaps a combination of both. I don't want to talk too much. I'm not an expert on this subject, but I just want to give you a government perspective. So since 2018 in Canada, we have invested $12 billion in nature conservation, different types of conservation project, terrestrial, oceans, national parks, OECMs, and we're right now roughly at 14% of terrestrial conservation and about 18% of ocean conservation. We can get to 30 by 30 just with government money. It just won't happen. There's not enough of it out there. As you can see around the world right now, from a fiscal point of view, many governments are being challenged. Canada is no exception. With the Prime Minister, we're in the process of finalizing our next nature strategy in Canada, which will be unveiled soon. But every time we invest in the protection of nature, it goes on our books as a cost. There are no fiscal benefit to it. There are obviously a number of unit natural benefits. In fact, Parks Canada has recently evaluated that for our. So I'm also the minister responsible for Parks Canada, which manages our networks of national parks, obviously a number of marine protected areas, and they've estimated that the ecological services rendered by this network of parks is in the order of $370 billion, which doesn't appear in the positive side of our accounting, but it could if together, globally, we can find ways to standardize. Oh wait, we're at the Standards Pavilion. Methodologies, and we can agree so that accounting agencies and financial investors can start looking at the opportunities of investing in nature as we would in any infrastructure projects, for example, that we are doing in Canada and many places around the world. So I think this is a really important topic. Very pleased that I was invited to be here this morning. And I will stop it there and pass it over back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Cannot be better as an opening speech for this session. Really appreciated your contribution. Now, I will ask the Mark to really explain to everybody what is Nature on the Balance Sheet initiative trying to do. So we do have just a 2-page slide. So
no, we don't have the slides, unfortunately, of the roadmap, which is on our website. There's a link there. So I'm going to have to try and paint that picture for you here without the slides, okay? So the idea that the assets, so both my parents are accountants, okay? I know that financial numbers are made up. We make up financial numbers to tell stories, and actually what we're trying to do with sustainability is also tell those stories in a better way. but there isn't confidence in the work that we've been doing, but we do have confidence in financial numbers. So it's very possible to bring that governance, that standards, that work into what we're doing here. Those assets that we rely on, that we put into the balance sheet, surely the biggest one of those is nature, and yet that is missing. The difference between the balance sheet in most companies and the value of those companies, on average, is about 3 times. So what is in that gap that is missing between the balance sheet and what is there? And part of that, not all of that, is nature. If we can bring that information through, then what we have is better information, less risk, better ideas of how we can spend that money, do what we want to do with the assets. But at the moment, we're doing that blind because we don't have this information. So the nature on the balance sheet, we met about 2 years ago in the side halls of a big conference like this, and all said that we needed to have a breakthrough because there's been a lot of work done on natural capital assessments. There's been a lot of work done in Canada and all around the world on that, on how do you actually measure, value natural capital, social and human capital, and that's good for internal decision making. There's also more recently been some accounting done, but most of those are mirror accounts. So what you'll have is you'll have your standard accounts, and then you'll have a mirror account, which someone like Nature in Brazil has done a lot of work on that, or Olam, or Foraco, who's in the room here today with us. So those mirror accounts are very helpful. But what we're trying to get to here is actually how can we see those assets on the balance sheet. So we were very fortunate to bring together a group of people in Bellagio in Italy, and in that meeting of about 20 people, including several people in the room here, we actually came up with a structure and we're able to work through the present accounting rules. So this isn't changing the accounting rules that are out there. In the present accounting rules, it is possible to have control over an asset, to be able to measure it, and then be able to have a proven benefit or liability. Okay? If you can do those 3 things, you can have an asset. So therefore, we're now working towards actually getting this nature literally onto the balance sheet. Now, it's much broader than that, because when we started looking at this, the problem is that although we've done these assessments, we've done the accounting, we think we can now get this into balance sheets, we need the financial tools and products that are able to actually realize this. We need the carbon markets. And the one place where this has really worked was Foraco. Rain in the room here, put your hand up, Rain. Okay, so Foraco is a forestry company which was doing very, very badly at one time. And what they were able to do by doing these accounts was not only realize those assets, but also change the narrative with their investors, with the government, with the others around about what they were trying to do. And that changed the market value of that company significantly. That worked in Australia because there was a market, because they were able to do these things. We've been looking at doing it in Canada, and not all of those pieces are in place yet. So it's really good to have you here with us today, Minister, because there's bits of this puzzle we need to make sure work. We need to have the standards there. We need to have the data to be able to do it. We need someone to assure it. And in Australia, the big assurance company steps forward and does it. In Europe, we haven't been able to find one yet that will step forward and assure it. We then need to have also the financial mechanisms. We need to have the governance processes in place. So all of those doors need to be open at the same time for this to really work. And when we were in Bellagio, we had people role-playing the different roles. And this was probably one of the breakthrough moments, because every single one of them said that actually, well, I'll do it if everyone else does, but someone else needs to do it first. So this really has to be a collaborative effort if we're going to do this. The benefits, though, are really exciting. We started a briefing note on this recently. We've had a 300% increase already in the number of people actually wanting to sign up for this, and a 70% open rate to the briefing note that went out this week. 70% of the people that received it opened it and clicked through on other information. So this is one of those products that is really, really getting people excited because it's about opportunity. It's not just about the risks that we face and trying to reduce those. It's about what could we do, and what new products and services could we do? How could we make sure that nature is actually being invested in? How can we make sure that the finance is flowing to the things that we want it to? All of those things that all these other pavilions are doing actually rely very strongly back on those accounting rules. And the fact that this is technically possible is really important. The next stage is actually getting people to do it. And we'll be launching in Davos coming up this year. We'll be launching a roadmap, which Jamie is in the front row here, has been helping us to develop with certain companies around the world, including a big proportion of the forestry sector, and Ross Hampton here from the ISFC. We're actually working with those forestry companies to look at how the investment pattern from the investors could change if a big proportion of the forestry sector all produce these accounts on the same day. What would that mean? Would investors turn around and change? So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So well explained so well about the now initiative. Now, so luckily, we have one financier that the Rabobank, as you know, the one of the largest that the bank and money going to providing money to the food system, agriculture, and from a financier point of view, how do you see this initiative working or not working, and what we need to do differently or more to make it realize? So that and my dream is, if this nature on the balance sheet is implemented, that the beneficiaries would be actually the farmers that along the value chain, and they will receive much more benefit. So that is my end goal. But tell us about how this will be actually the functioning better.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. For those who don't know Rabobank, we are a Dutch bank based in the Netherlands, operating globally in the food and agricultural sector. So, we did the TNFD analysis on our portfolio, and it showed that 85% of our portfolio is highly or very highly dependent on nature. For us, that was not really like a big surprise, but it was very important to do this because it brought it into the boardroom. So now even our board thinks, okay, this is important. Our portfolio is very, very reliant on nature. So that's when we started to work on what can we do. We started piloting with mainly ecosystem service payments. We built a biodiversity monitor, which is a tool which we built together with WWF and a big dairy company in the Netherlands, where if a farmer applies to a certain set of KPIs, then he will get a reward from Rabobank in the sense of a discounted interest rate. But he would also receive a premium from the dairy company. He would also receive a discount from the water company. He would receive tax advantages. So it's like that stacked rewarding for the farmer that makes it really interesting, because just the interest rate discount is not going to convince a farmer to make the transition. So that stacked rewarding and the payment of ecosystem services is something we dived into. That's not necessarily putting nature on the balance sheet, but I think it's a big part of the puzzle. So we are experimenting with different types of financial mechanisms. We have a big office in Brazil, as we all know. Brazil has a forest code, and we really want our clients, our farmer clients, not to deforest their legal rights. So they have legal rights to deforest. A bank cannot say you cannot deforest. We can only stimulate them not to do it. So in that, we also look at possibilities for them to buy nature and provide them with a 20 years loan. I don't know if you know about banks, but 20 years is extremely long. So we can work with tenors, like the length of the loan. We can work with margins. We can work with grace periods. So we are trying that. But the difficulty is, and that brings us, I think, much closer to the nature really on the balance sheet, is we have to include it in our decision making, in the credit models, in the risk models. And that is still not the case. So this is something we are really looking into, and we're very early stage, but this is really important for Rabobank to get more of a sense of how that could work and who then we need. So the Nature on the Balance Sheet initiative is a really welcoming initiative for Rabobank, because I think we need a lot of learning still to do, but I'm very hopeful that we, at a point, will be able to do it, because I think that's the systemic change we really need.
Very beautifully said. That's exactly what we want to do, and we are now trying to identify where we need to do more. You mentioned this and how to change the decision-making system of creditors and investors. That and how we could really do it. That is our homework together. So now I want to call on the Majun that based on your very rich experience working for the banking system in China, tell us what is your advice to make it happen?
Thank you, Naoko. I was treated by her a couple of days ago in Sao Paulo to join this interesting panel. She said I was from Central Bank. That's a perspective they wanted. So I was in the Chinese Central Bank back 10 years ago as chief economist. At that time, I was leading the drafting of the Chinese green financial framework. And within that framework, which we built over the past 10 years and now expanding to a size of 4 trillion, actually 43 trillion RMB worth of green loans outstanding and 2.3 trillion RMB worth of green bonds. That's by far the largest green finance market in the world. And what we did is that we built 4 pillars in this framework. One is taxonomy. We define clearly what are the green and sustainable activities we want to see money flow into, including the banking system, bond market, equity financing, and so on. And we evolved the taxonomies over time. And recently, we also have a separate biodiversity taxonomy, in addition to the broader taxonomy, which covers everything. And so the biodiversity taxonomy is much more detailed on, forestry, on water, on, irrigation and other things. Yeah. Of course, the species and so on. The second pillar is disclosure, which initially is focusing on the environmental benefits of particular projects. For example, you claim the project is reducing carbon, tell me how many tons of carbon you're reducing. And now we'll gradually move towards a more complicated measurement, including nature. For example, TNFD is now being piloted in China, which means that tell me to what extent you improve the nature, right? Improve biodiversity. And the third pillar is the range of financial products, including all the kind of loans-related, bond-related products, sustainability-related products, and carbon markets and others. And the fourth pillar, which is the most important to everything, including the ones we talk about today, incentives. We need to give incentive for the private sector to allocate money to the green activities that we want, including nature. Yeah. And I will come back to that and how to do this, particularly on nature. And just give you 2 examples we did on incentives. One is central bank offers a facility, which is called decarbonization facility, to renewable energy, energy efficiency projects, and CCUS. So we offer interest rate of 1.5% for these projects, much lower than the market. So essentially, a central bank subsidy for green lending. Yeah. And the second one is the local governments coming from the fiscal pocket, they subsidize green loans. Of course, it's on a voluntary basis at the local government level. Not every local government does it. Some local governments do it. The one, for example, in Huzhou, which is a green finance pilot city that I set up 10 years ago, they've been using that incentive, which is now growing the green loans to 34% of the total balance sheet, which is, I think, one of the highest in developing country, emerging markets. Now, coming back to nature, on the measurement, which sounded like very similar to the Chinese concept of GEP, yeah? This gross ecological product, which measures the value creation, for ecosystem services, right? And I was involved in some of the experiments using GEP to support the plantation of grass and the trees on desert in the Mongolia. And I spent quite a few days, and on that trip, I discussed it with Ouyang, who actually developed the GEP. And now the difficulty that you can measure a lot of value, right? They came up with a value for the Inner Mongolia county. Yeah, if you grow grass and all of that, it's a few hundred billion RMB. Yeah, it's thousands, times higher than the actual, observed cash flow into the projects. So how do you get these this huge amount? We came up with a few ideas, which is some of them are being experimented, but most of them are still, in sort of exploration stage. One is what we call eco-compensation mechanism. Yeah, whoever consumes the service, they should pay. And that story actually started more than 10 years ago in China between 2 provinces. Anhui province upstream of the river, Zhejiang province downstream the river. Anhui province was putting, the pollutants into the river, right? Then it hurts the downstream. The downstream guys are richer. They say, we will pay you for not polluting, yeah? So they reach agreement, say, I pay you 1 billion RMB every year for not polluting. And the upstream said, yes, I achieve your number, I receive your money, and I'll stop my factory from polluting the river. So this is what I call, compensation mechanism. We need to design something like that. Whoever benefits, we should find them and ask them to pay. Yeah, this is one way. We have experimented that in different occasions. Some successful, but very hard. Yeah, most of the guys who should pay, they refuse to pay. Yeah, that's one possibility. The second possibility is that these ecosystems can help you to develop a bioeconomy, some economic projects. Yeah, for example, tourism, right? When your ecosystem is so nice, and maybe the tea growing business, yeah, and some Chinese herbs, all these things are money making. And if you grow these business in the territory, and they become bigger, you can tax them, and they become part of a revenue for the ecosystem development. Yeah. And third one is really the carbon market related instruments. Whatever you do, for example, you grow grass or trees on desert, you reduce carbon. And let's sell the carbon credit in some markets. But again, it takes a long time to develop methodology. Yeah, it takes decades to get there. And one new area of exploration is bio credit, not carbon credit. Yeah, they say simply because I increase biodiversity, I should get credit. And this is something at the experimental stage, on the drafting stage, being experimented to get somebody to pay for you.
Thank you, Majun. It's really wonderful to have you. And we need to really appreciate that China is so much ahead of this capital accounting, but also how to use it for the policy and then the real market economy. So good to have you. And now it seems the minister is nodding during his talk about how do you see that from minister point of view, the policymaker point of view, that what we could really do more to really create the incentive rather than create the penalties through the system. What is your maybe take and advice to us? Because just doing the natural capital accounting really doesn't do the complete job. We have to really find a way to the very active policy intervention. But any kind of advice you may have for us.
I don't know that I have a lot of advice for you. I think you have a lot of advice for people like me. But I mean, it comes back to what you were saying. Unless and until we have common set of standards, understanding of how this should be done, what are the gold standards out there to doing this in terms of the evaluations, and then putting it on your books somehow. And until there is an understanding, common understanding, and agreement in the financial market about, yes, this is real, I can invest in this, as it will be our challenge. I think we are getting much closer on nature than we were just 3 years ago in Montreal when we held COP15. Obviously, this was already talked about, but there's been so much progress that has been done. But it is a challenge of the commons. Like until this is widespread and upon and accepted, it's going to be difficult for governments to be able to move on that. Obviously, and as you pointed out, some governments are more ahead than others. Certainly what China is doing, what Australia is doing, what Brazil is doing. I think we're trying to do, we are doing bits and parts in Canada, but we have to complete a number of these operations so that we have the range of methodologies that are required to be able to do that. We need to find someone who's willing to ensure that in Canada. And so I think governments have an important role to play, but I think people like you can help us convince some of these institutions to come on board and work with us so that we can make this a reality.
Thank you. Before I ask Mark to close, I will ask Reike to what's your take?
My take on the role of the government, or just in general? Yeah. Well, listening to the others, I was thinking about examples, how to make it more concrete, because it's kind of it's a topic that for many people is not easy to understand. To put nature on the balance sheet, what does it mean? What is natural capital? What is so? Maybe I can give you an example of where is struggling with. For example, here in Brazil, due to the forest code, our farmers need to have sometimes even 80% of natural vegetation on their agricultural lands. As Rabobank, we take collateral on land, but we can only take collateral on the agricultural part of the land, not on the forested land. We all know, logically, that the forest is very beneficial to the agricultural land. But we, as a bank, cannot value that piece of forest. We cannot put it in our collateral. We cannot put it in our risk model. So maybe this is an example which makes it maybe more tangible in the sense that this is something we should solve, because everybody knows logically that nature has an enormous value, but we just have to make it economically valuable as well.
Thank you. I'm just notified that we do have another 10-15 minutes to go. But Minister, if you have next appointment, you can always leave. But then, is he okay? All right, so we can have another conversation in 10-15 more minutes. Thank you. So that what you said is exactly the motivation behind this nature on the balance sheet initiative, because we have several Japanese forest companies and the loss has left. But their struggle is that the big forest companies always do have a protective forest and productive forest, but on their book it's only productive forest, I mean timber forest, and a lot of investment in natural forest is not accounted for, and there is a lack of incentive for them to do more. So that, but it's a challenge. That's something we would like to solve through this kind of initiative. So thank you for that example. Very good. Now I want to ask Majun that you already gave us a lot of the good lesson. But if you just tell us about which part of that lesson you have already doing in China could be also that replicated around the world. Do you have any advice for us? Because that if I understand correctly, there are a lot of initiatives being tested. Some is much ahead, some is still kind of an experimental stage, and you could maybe share with us an example of the lesson that what we could learn from China case.
I think the most effective way of getting money to nature forestry is convince the very, very top boss. Yeah, and if the number one in the country says it's important, he can move the fiscal resources around. Allocate 0.1% to you, and it's a lot of money. And now it's much harder to negotiate between private sector players. It's millions of players. Each one is so small. Yeah. So now my experience is really on working out a green finance policy framework, which is endorsed by the central government, and consolidating all ministries' policy, including fiscal authority and banking regulator, and say we collectively drive money to targeted areas. Yeah, it's a list of activities. If you can include your nature project in the list, boom, it goes. Yeah, we move 40-something trillion RMB to private sector money to that list of activities. Now this is of course China set up a political system may be different from other countries, but I think in a lot of developing countries they still have that possibility because the government has more of a convening power than the private sector itself. Yeah. Now the other thing that I think instead of convincing people on a moral basis, you be good, right, and contribute something to nature, biodiversity, to humankind and everything. Let's make it economically attractive. Yeah. Basically, I'm talking about the economic activities growing due to service to the ecosystem, right? Tourism, economic, crops, and a lot of other things. Maybe inputs to the pharmaceutical industries, which are very high value added. So if we can explore more of these activities, and then you tax them as a company grow, I think it's another easier way of really finding money for nature.
Thank you so much. Just remind me of that one session that China hosted. It's a ISSB International Sustainability Forum, and then starting with the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, every financing system that decision makers are lined up, because there is a big support from the top of the political system. It's a really beautiful mechanism to get the initiative going down to the entire system. You are right that not every country has it, but I'm also keen that but I also see that developing countries are much keener to make it happen, because they see that this is one way to attract a lot of private finance from internationally. I mean, to have this right system that like ISSB standard, for instance, how to get the finance from international sphere. So I see a lot of coalition energy between China and Africa, Africa Capitals and Natural Capital Coalition. They are very significant part of the conversation. So I found it's very interesting, that's political dynamism. Minister, you may want to jump in.
I don't see that the challenge is to convince the financial community of doing this. I mean, we issued our first set of green bonds 3 years ago in Canada. They were between 2.5 to 3 times oversubscribed. It wasn't for nature. It was mostly clean tech, renewable energy projects, green infrastructures. But there is clearly an appetite by the investment community out there to put money in these type of projects. What you advising us government, putting in place the necessary rules and regulations to make it happen. What we have to do is provide that framework and that certainty that is needed so investors can come in. But in my view, it's not a lack of appetite by the investment community, but it's the lack of the proper tools to allow them to put their money where we, or many of us, would like to see that money go.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. I think it's not about the appetite, and in addition also to what you were saying, 2 points. So one, I think if we look at our clients, because for Rabobank we couldn't exist without our clients, but our clients are really now seeing sustainability as a necessity. It's not like a nice thing to do anymore. It's not a moral thing. It's really a business thing, because they see the physical risks in their value chains, especially in the food sector. They really see what's happening. I mean, the coffee in Brazil last year, prices went up like 50%. So they really see that they have to work on resilience in their value chain. And there's, of course, different ways to do it, but that for me is a very positive thing. It's not positive that the physical risks become very visible, but it is possible that, positive that these companies are really eager to work on this. And that's what Rabobank also looks into. We are trying to get the value chain together, so farmers, traders, processors, retailers, and try to see how we can maybe divide the responsibility in the value chain, so that everybody contributes. So that's maybe a positive thing. And adding to, there's not a lack of appetite. There's a lack of frameworks, I think. Standardized frameworks, around unified frameworks. And the second thing on making sure that the top level is involved. This is something we did within Rabobank, and for us was really, really important to get the board understanding what this means. So I'm here now with my CEO, and in all of his panels, he's now calling for putting nature on the balance sheet, which for me is but it is very important to really look at the boardroom, make sure that they are convinced to do it, and then the rest will follow as well.
I just want to say about this, the standardization. Accounting itself took centuries to get to the stage it's at now. We are going an awful lot faster with this impact valuation accounting. And actually only 2 weeks ago, we've completed a merger to consolidate that space. So I'm feeling very confident going forward. In fact, we've actually been able to acquire most of the IP that's out there into one space as well. So over this next period of time, we've just announced the setting up of the Impact Value Standards Board, which will be an independent body, which will set those standards that we need, that has the backing of the International Federation of Accountants, insurers, of different governments, of all of those developers of this work over the last years. All of them are behind this and will be involved in this process. So answering the question about we need the standard, it's coming. Let's make sure we do all these other bits of the puzzle together as well.
I agree. He said he agreed. Very good. Maybe 5 minutes. Are there any burning questions from the floor? Okay. Please tell us who you are. Identify yourself.
Hello, I'm Louise Amon, working for Capitals Coalition. So we know that there is UNCIA, who is working on natural capital accounting, so a global standard for countries to value their ecosystem services, basically. We know it's quite advanced from a public perspective, but the question is, for accompanying this space for many years, how is it connecting to nature on the balance sheet and to the private initiative? I'm just thinking that we did it with GDP and value allocation to individual business and finance. What's the roadmap to do the same for natural capital accounting globally?
Anybody want to answer? Maybe I will. The leadership from the top is very important. Okay, yeah, we can combine, yeah.
Hi, I'm Thomas Enik. I'm with the Climate Liabilities and Assets Initiative. When we talk about the balance sheet, we talk about assets, but we also talk about liabilities. And I would love a little bit to hear about your perspective on the liability side, nature as a liability.
Okay, Gavin.
One more question. We've talked a lot about standardization. Standardization of methodologies is also important. Yesterday, Capitals Coalition, Nature Positive Initiative, IUCN, TNFD, and others launched the aspiration to build a nature measurement protocol. So I wonder what we can learn from the GHG protocol space, given some of the climate experience on the panel, and apply it to standardization of methodologies, not just standards.
Well, very big 3 questions. Okay, Majun, you would like to answer. Can you answer that? All right, so let's go for that. I will take maybe the first question so that the white.
No, I think it's an issue of standardization of standardizations, because a lot of standards, measurement and the frameworks are being proposed. On the nature side, I think many of them are popping up, right, including your balance sheet approach, TNFD and others. Now, let me give you one example on the taxonomy side, how we sort of promote convergence. Back 10 years ago, China did the first official taxonomy for green finance, basically a list of activities that's labeled as green for financing. And then 5 years ago, Europe came up with a sustainable finance taxonomy. And I immediately thought it's going to be different, and it will eventually see a proliferation of so many different taxonomies in the world. Now it's 50, 50 taxonomies in the world. And what we did back 5 years ago is form a working group between China and Europe to develop a common ground taxonomy, which means that the overlapping portion of the Chinese taxonomy with European taxonomy, we take it out and call it common ground taxonomy. It's now being used. This common ground taxonomy is now used for cross-border issuance of green bonds, for example, by Chinese issuers selling their bonds in Europe, right? So this is a way of consolidating, converging different standards into one, at least to be used in particular situation. I'm hoping in the nature side, there are not too many standards, And if you can converge into one, put it into ISSB, which is ISSB maybe S3 or S4, then everybody, all the countries will use it. Otherwise, hundreds of standards will really confuse people and increase costs.
Cannot agree more. Anybody who can take the GHG question or anything? No? You want to take something else? All right. You agree?
Yeah, I just want to say I very much agree. This is what Rabobank is looking for. Even for ecosystem services, we actually would need a global framework for, although it's very locally defined, I think there should be some framework for ecosystem services as well. And ISSB has been doing great work on this area. So
I also agree. As you may know, governments tend to be risk averse. And especially now in many parts of the world where there is a rise in populism and even many political parties and unfortunately governments who are saying that climate change is even real, the more we can standardize these things, the more we can mainstream them, the easier it's going to be for people like me to go and see my boss and my finance minister and say, hey, we need to do this because everyone else is doing it and we don't want to be left behind in terms of what this could mean or this could represent for investment in our country in doing things like protecting nature, like especially in the case of Canada, working with indigenous peoples across the country to help them protect they've been protecting their lands for a very long time. We kind of messed it up. So how do we find balance in all of that? So I think your work is extremely important for people like me.
Just to touch, well, first of all, on the TNFD, Emily McKenzie used to work for me. She's now the technical director there. Complete and utter alignment with all the work we're doing in TNFD. And also tomorrow we're having a session with ISSB, particularly about all of that. So there's a lot of work going on in the background, and Gavin and I work very closely together. All of these initiatives are very much connected. We need to make sure it's really clear for the users, though, about that connection, even if we're doing it ourselves. I think the other thing on the liabilities, completely agree as well. We shouldn't always look just at the assets of what we can do. There are liabilities in this, and we've seen certain sectors that are going to find this a lot more difficult. We do find with some companies that we're working with now, they're getting preferential finance because they're able to understand their liabilities. So if you can understand your liabilities and explain it to people, there may be a way to actually turn that into a positive as well. So, but I mean, we have to have a double entry bookkeeping here. We have to have liabilities and assets. It's got to be both.
Thank you. Now it's almost the time to close, but maybe I will just take this Louis' question about the UNCR. Right, we are mostly talking about the private sector balance sheet, but of course that the UNCR has done a lot of work. But the challenge is how to convince finance ministers that this is a very important piece they have to pay attention to, and that's actually part of our work, a little bit done by Systemic, particularly that we are now talking to the finance ministers that to how to let them recognize that the value of the nature, that the positive side but also negative side, and then to take some of the country example that if they really appreciate that the loss of that coming from nature, how much does it cost, and if they do it right, how much they can save going forward. It's more, we call it the resilience work, but it's now entering into finance minister circle that as an instrument and showing with number the methodology. So we are trying to shift the finance ministers, also the IMF, because it also has an impact on the data sustainability analysis. So we are slowly moving those big pieces and together with this nature on the balance sheet. So, well, that our panelists, thank you so much for coming at this very early morning session. That it's a really important one with coming from the financier, that the central bank and the ministers together to how to strengthen this nature on the balance sheet initiative. To me, it's really the lever to create that the important value system and the economic system along it. And so with you, that we would like to work much harder to make it happen. Thank you so much for coming.